Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a joint presentation between Fraser Library and the Center for Digital Learning and the Open Services Committee, which brings the two together along with folks from some other departments around campus for today's Open Access Week 2021 event presentation titled Myths of Open Access and Freeing Your Work, featuring our scholarly communications librarian at Fraser Library and the chair of the Open Services Committee, Jon Grunert. This talk is going to be all about open access and using it in really practical ways for your own scholarship. But I'm going to leave all of the extra explaining to Jon and hand it over to him.
Right. Thank you, Amanda. Good afternoon. So this is Open Access Week. It is Thursday of Open Access Week, which continues on until Sunday. It is an international event that is annual, and it is deliberately international. It is something that we see events from 6 out of 7 continents and from most states. A lot of universities and a lot of college libraries have open access events that they invite people to. So I'm glad that you all are able to join us at one that we're doing here at Geneseo. So let me share my screen first. This is the wrong slide. There we go. There we go. Is that showing now? All right, great. So today I'm going to talk with you about open access and freeing your work. Open access is an idea that has been a new idea for several decades, but it may be coming into its own, and I think that people have been saying that it may be coming into its own for a while. So today I'm going to talk about open access and how to free some of your work and to make it more open access so that you can get a wider audience and so that you can make your work more accessible to more people. So what we're doing today is to look at a couple of pieces to this. First, we're going to look at a common understanding of open access and its benefits, just so we're all on the same page. After that, we'll look at debunking some of the myths of open access. There are a lot of myths and a lot of misunderstandings. I'll talk about a few of them. And if you have other ones that you'd like to talk about, I'm sure there will be some time at the end because myths exist for a reason, and we'll talk about that. And then finally, we'll do some strategies for how to liberate your articles and make them more accessible, not just behind paywalls and not just behind those forms of limited access. So first, what is open access? And then how is open access different from traditional publishing practices? First, from Peter Suber, open access is a kind of access, not a kind of content. It can apply to any kind of content, not just scholarship. This is an important point that I think is lost in a lot of discussions of open access. A piece of information is not in itself open access. It's how one gets to that information that makes that thing open access. So we talk about open access publishing rather than open access content. So what is it? First, open access is immediate. It is instant. You can get to it right now as soon as it's made available by the author. Open access is free, so it's instantly available to all. There is no cost associated with it. There also shouldn't be any passwords associated with it. It should be able to get to it right away. Open access is online. It's instantly available to all with an internet connection. This is an important piece of open access because open doesn't exist without a digital world. You can have things that are put into print, but print is in itself a slight barrier. Internet is also a barrier because not everybody has internet access, and internet reliability is different in different places on campus and also different places within the United States and internationally as well. Finally, open access is reusable. So it's instantly available to all with an internet connection. and without usage restrictions. So it's reusable, not just in terms of reading it multiple times, but being able to reproduce it and to redistribute it in a lot of different ways. The traditional subscription model looks something like this, where we have the publicly funded research that is submitted to a journal and then peer reviewed and accepted for publication. At that point, the author will transfer copyright to the publishers, and the authors don't necessarily retain any rights. When I teach about this to undergraduate students, I have them draw a line where they see all the author's rights going away. And they always draw that line between that first and that right in the middle here, right between the first line and the second line. Excuse me. After the authors make those, hold on a second. If we get those first two lines, we get to paywalls. Excuse me. After that, a lot of money starts to be transferred. So the articles get pushed behind paywalls, and then libraries start to pay for subscriptions. Once all this money gets transferred, we start to see the rights. That's where the rights of the authors often are going away. In other models, we start to open up research a little bit more. So in green open access, we have the author assigning copyright to the publishers, but they're retaining the right to disseminate an open access copy of the accepted manuscript. Green open access is produced by the authors themselves. So this is something that it's the PDF that exists before it actually goes into production. So the published versions are available to subscribers immediately, as long as the open access version is there. This can accelerate progress and research a little bit more, although it's not the fastest version. The fastest version is gold open access. Gold open access, the authors retain the copyright, and the publisher has the license to publish, but they may be required to publish or to pay an article processing charge to cover some of these publishing costs. So the difference between green and gold is something that is discussed as a lot as to which one is actually better. The gold open access is when the journals themselves are producing the open access version, whereas the green open access is it has the responsibility all put onto the author to make that available themselves. Practically, there's not much of a difference for the user. The user can get access to either one of these versions in the end. It's just a matter of whether something is the final PDF or whether it's a preprint or a postprint. This is a graphic that I use a lot with students, just to show the difference between where preprints and postprints exist. Because it's sometimes a challenge what pre refers to, before what. It's not before the thing is printed. And postprint is not after the thing is printed. It's before and after the processes of peer review. So the preprint is the submitted version, so the version that the authors submit to the journal, and then the postprint is what the version that the journal is going to be publishing, though it'll lack a lot of the branding. So who can benefit from open access? And also, can open access lead to equity among researchers? That second question is a much bigger question that I don't know if we'll have time to address today. So who benefits from open access? I have this divided up into 4 different parts. So before we get to that, the prime beneficiaries, again, from Peter Suber, are researchers, even though open access also serves the entire public. So how does it benefit different groups? We'll come to this. This is a general idea about who benefits from it. Everything from more exposure to work, to public access, to compliance with grant rules. That's an important piece of open access, to things like higher citation rates and getting more people and different people to see your own work. So the benefit to authors is probably the most important for right now. Authors benefit because there is an increased audience, not just people who have subscriptions, not just people who work at institutions. With an increased audience, that generally can lead to more citations and more impact. There are studies that of the relative impact and citation numbers for traditional publications versus open access publications. And open access publications tend to have 10 to 20% more citations than traditional publishing. There's also benefit to researchers. First, there's a faster distribution of research. So you're able to get to new research much faster. Additionally, it's not limited to those with institutional affiliation. So if we think about the people who have made scientific progress, one of the greatest achievements of the past 150 years was the theory of relativity, which was posited by a patent office clerk. If Einstein didn't have access to his own thoughts, of course, but also some of these other affiliations or some of these articles, that might not have existed. But he had access in some way, and it was an unexpected place for this new theory to come from. There are surprises in research, and I think that that's a lot of value for open access and for researchers. So institutional affiliation does not mean that those are the only people who can give good research or who can produce good research. There's also a benefit to students. Access is not limited to the subscriptions that their schools can afford. No library has access to everything, and by opening up research, you're giving students more access. It also leads to the discoverability of the newest ideas, not just what has been given the gold stamp of approval through peer review, but the newer things that are out and not quite yet tested. This is one thing that demonstrates to students the process of science and the process of knowledge, process of research, that there are things out there that are untested, and just because something is untested, that doesn't mean that it's not good yet. So showing students that there are options to maybe fail, that's a valuable piece. Additionally, when the students' professors see the newest research and have this broad access, they teach their students better, or they teach their students perhaps the newest things that are available. And that in itself is a value to students. There's also a benefit to the public. Researchers in developing countries have a better chance to see open access work than everything that is behind paywalls. Additionally, publicly funded research, so things that are funded by tax dollars, also become publicly available, and that's an important thing as well. So why is there resistance to open access? This is something that you all will know as well, why there is some resistance, because I'm sure some of you have experienced this in your research. Peter Suber again, the largest obstacles to OA are unfamiliarity and misunderstanding. So a few key myths that we can talk about here. First, publishing preprints will get your research scooped. This idea comes from the belief that by putting your research out there, someone else is going to claim it and then claim credit for it. I completely understand and sympathize with this, because as junior faculty members, the requirement to publish and to publish new things and to publish in higher prestige journals is out there. That's a real pressure. And the fear of getting scooped is also, it's a valid fear. I don't want to discount that those feelings, those perceptions. However, there's not really any evidence of that. Researchers do have a responsibility to cite preprints as they would cite any other published work. Any researcher who's not doing that is behaving unethically, and the responsibility is on all researchers to be as ethical as they can. And then there's no actual evidence that depositing preprints leads to scooping. You can also publish preprints after the final article is also published. So in KnightScholar, we are asking people to submit their preprints and postprints for articles for which we can't deposit the full PDF. And that can be an article that's already 10 years old. I doubt that research is going to get scooped 10 years later, but at this point, I think putting a preprint out there will be valuable for researchers who can't access that final article. Another myth: open access publishing has lower standards. This myth comes from the idea that there are a lot of publishers that don't have peer review. And it's also the idea that things that are free are lower quality. I understand that, and I sympathize with that as well. However, there are other measurements for quality. Peer review is not the only measurement for the quality of research. Additionally, researchers need to evaluate articles themselves for how relevant, reliable, reproducible, and generally how good they are. Open access publishing also does not mean that something is let me back up. Traditional publishing does not mean that something is without fault. There are retractions that do happen in journals. One of the most notorious ones is from the Lancet, with the article published many years ago about linking autism to vaccines. These retractions do happen, and they happen regularly. So print is not the only metric for a high standard of research. And the last myth that I want to talk about today is open access publishing has created predatory publishers. So there's a lot of discussion about what makes something a predatory publisher. Is it just the transfer of money? Does paying someone to produce your article make that publisher a predatory publisher? Maybe, if they're not being if they're ingenuous, if they're disingenuous, then yes, they would be a predatory publisher. However, we also have to think about where money exists, where money happens, and where the money is transferred. So there are a lot of reputable OA publishers, and you can look at them through the directory of open access journals. So you can check and double check that an open access journal is registered in the DOAJ. And that's a way that you can check if an OA publisher is reputable or not. Also, preprints and postprints are usually in repositories, but they're also published in print journals. So that's not where you're going to find necessarily predatory publishers. There are some in the library world who talk about the more traditional publishers as the predatory publishers. Those are the folks who make 30 to 40% who have a return investment of around 30 or 40%. So that's a lot of money that they are making without having to spend a lot. If you think about a lot of the print journals, they're getting their peer reviewers without charge. They're getting the research conducted and they don't have to pay for it. They don't have to pay for the authorship. And they're producing it without paying anything. It's the print and the distribution that is where their costs lie, but they're not having to pay all that much anymore. So what do we do from here? If we have these myths and we have an idea of what open access is and we want to make it bigger, what can we do that? Oh, I want to suggest that we all start using and promoting open access as much as possible. So what can you do to promote open access? First, you can research using open access material. There are lots of ways to start researching using open access material. You can find it in institutional repositories, like KnightScholar or like many other universities and college libraries. You can also use oadoi.org. So when you have a DOI for an article, if you can't access the full article, but or if you want to find an open access version, you can just type in oadoi.org/ and then type in the DOI. That will use Unpaywall to locate and retrieve an open access version of that article. You can find open access material through the DOAJ, or you can use the open access filters in a lot of databases. Not every database that the library subscribes to has an open access filter, but some of them, and I've show here ScienceDirect and GloCat, they do have an open access filter in a lot of, then that'll get a lot of stuff for you. You can also publish in open access journals. So there are two ways of doing this. You can also look through the DOAJ for a journal where you think your article might fit well, or you can start your own open access journal. And there are a lot of people that you can talk to about starting your own, including me. And if I can't help you right away, I can help point you in the right direction. Starting your own open access journal can be a challenge, but I think that if you're determined, then we can do something about it and we can make it happen. Finally, you can make preprints and postprints available in an institutional repository. So when you deposit your work, you can deposit it in a preprint server. So things like the archive, the bioarchive, the sociology version of archive, and then the philosophy of science archive, or a lot of other disciplinary preprint servers. Or you can deposit in KnightScholar. And KnightScholar is Geneseo's institutional repository where we make things open access. So KnightScholar, this is the image. We have a lot of benefits to KnightScholar. First, there's the benefit of more exposure to your work. So more exposure is tied with the idea of universal access. So it gets your material out to a wide range of people and potential researchers. KnightScholar is part of the larger digital commons network. So your work can be linked to other work and you can find potential collaborators and other people who may want to use your work. KnightScholar is also indexed, so it's crawled by Google and it can be more easily discovered. So articles that are published in KnightScholar can be discovered especially through Google Scholar, and that's a way that a lot of researchers conduct their research. You also have persistent access. You don't lose something through link deterioration. You have long-term, so persistent access deals with the ideas of long-term preservation. And then also KnightScholar has a wide range of content. It's not limited to one discipline like archive or bioarchive. It includes everything from every place on campus. So open access is big, and KnightScholar is also fairly big and growing every day. And I want to be sure that you all have opportunities to publish OA and to deposit your material into KnightScholar. So with that, I'd like to see if there are any questions. First, I'll go into the chat to see if anybody put anything in there. All right, so in the chat, we have two questions. Ideas of predatory presses. I think I talked briefly about predatory publishers. If you have questions about a specific open access program, I recommend you talk to the Scholarly Communications Librarian, so that would be me. about looking at it. There used to be a list called Beale's list, and I think that, and he was sued by some people that he identified as predatory publishers, so he stopped working on that. But I think there are some places in the internet where you can where other open access journals have been vetted. Also, is open access faster publication? So I think generally yes, because open access doesn't go through the process of printing and making everything as nicely branded as a lot of those formal traditional journals do. So I think when we talk about speed of the open access process, a lot of what slows down scholarly publishing is the peer review process, because that can take a long time for researchers to have the time to read their other articles, and that's going to be a long time regardless of whether it's open access or traditional publishing. But then after that happens, and after the edits get in, I think then the speed is on the side of open access. Right. Sidar asks green and gold. So gold is when the author, gold is when the journal itself, when the journal editorial board makes the final version of the article freely available. So a lot of times this costs money. There are article processing charges or author processing charges. There are different acronyms, and that money goes toward making that final version openly available. Green is kind of more ground up. So if we think about it in terms of what these colors actually mean, gold is when you spend the gold. Gold is when the author has to spend the gold, and green is when the author is the one who is producing it themselves. So like growing it. So the green option is like the preprint or the postprint is submitted or is put into an institutional repository. Does that make a bit more sense, Sidar?
Yeah, it does. And
Okay.
in that case, the two are, well, in the green option, do they also keep the name of the journal on the paper, even if it's a green option, or?
So that's it should. So anything that's put into an institutional repository should have the citation and a link to the final version. So that way an author or if a researcher finds that preprint, but they want to see what the final version is so that they can cite that version, they can get to it. So green could also be just an earlier version of the article, but also pointing to the final one.
Okay.
So best practices for submitting preprints and postprints into institutional repositories is to include a watermark or a running header or footer that identifies it as a preprint or a postprint. That way authors are not misled into thinking that it is the final version. All right, Becky asks, does the library have restrictions on the types of text that it publishes under its imprints? That's a question that is for the library's publishing office, which is not me. I believe there are restrictions. There are some restrictions, but I don't know what those restrictions are. They might just be capability restrictions. But are there materials excluded from KnightScholar? We won't violate copyright. So if something is not legally allowed to be on KnightScholar, we will not put it on KnightScholar. But other than that, we are very open to most things that can be put on KnightScholar. We want KnightScholar to include things that are produced by people at Geneseo or at Geneseo. So that it's an institutional repository and not just anyone who wants to put something in can put something in. So even though we don't actively exclude things, we prefer not to have it be a place where people put half-baked thoughts. So it's not a place for people to just put versions of articles that they're kind of testing out. It should be final. It should be well honed works and developed arguments, and not just here's an idea that I'm throwing out there to see what sticks. All right. Amanda asks, is sharing a preprint with an institutional repository ever banned by the journals an article an author works with? There are some journals that do not want preprints to be used. I don't know why, but it does happen, and part of that is these journals want to protect their bottom line, and they want to protect their money. Preprints, though, are fairly widely allowed, but it's also something that a lot of authors don't necessarily keep, or keep really close tabs on. So that's just something to be aware of as authors. It's good to keep all of the versions of your article, from the submitted one to the accepted, especially submitted, accepted, and final. If for no other reason than sharing with your students the processes of scholarship, and that even when you have finished up your PhD and you've gotten tenure and promoted 3 times, your articles are not necessarily ever finished on the first draft. So it's a good idea of just demonstrating to students that perfection is sometimes achievable, but not always instant. All right. Amanda asks about the process of submitting something to KnightScholar. All right. So you guys can still see my screen, right? Okay. So when you go into KnightScholar, there's a button over here on the left for submit research. When you click on that, you have really wide options as to what you can do. So you can upload something to any of these research, scholarship, and creative works sections. So if you are a member of the, let's see who's here. Oh, Siddhar's here. So if you're a member of the math department, you can just click on mathematics, faculty, staff works, and that's where you're going to be submitting your research. When you get to here, you have to fill in the ones that are the fields that are marked in red. So the title, author, document type, publication date, and then actually upload the file. Everything else that you do is optional. The more you put in, the more of these that you fill out, the more discoverable your article will be. Once you submit the article, it will actually go to the KnightScholar email address, or there'll be a notification to the KnightScholar email address that somebody has uploaded a file, and one of us on the KnightScholar team will check it to make sure that everything is done correctly, so that we can just click publish. As far as actually checking all of the information, we rely on the authors to ensure that that they are permitted to publish their work or to publish this version of their work. If you have questions about that, you can go to Sherpa Romeo. Amanda, would you post the link into the chat? Sherpa Romeo does some examination of various author agreements in different journals, and they publish this list of what these journals generally allow. I think it's mostly right, but you just have to check and make sure. Or again, you can ask me about a specific journal, and that's something that we can talk about. So it is a curated repository. We do try to make sure that things fit in with the general scope, but we also are not examining every single piece to make sure that, at this point, we're not examining every single piece to make sure that everybody's doing the right thing. But we trust that a lot of the authors at Geneseo will be. Okay. Question about academia.edu. Academia.edu got into the URL game for the .edu suffix before it started being just for colleges and universities. It is a for-profit platform. It's there. I think it's on a similar level to Sci-Hub, but I think there are a lot of things that could be better about it, and a lot of things that could be worse. I do like that it requires people to contact authors in a lot of senses. I think that the best kept secret in academia is contacting authors for versions of their work. And I think that academia.edu kind of does a lot to help that connection go, that connection happen. I think there are other places to post material. I think that institutional repositories are a lot more discoverable than academia.edu. If for no other reason than they don't require my email address for me to get access to those files. And then just being able to link and just looking at the nonprofit versions rather than something that is for profit. And also the difference between postprint and PDF. So the postprint is going to be the version that is going to be the accepted version. So the Word document that you would have sent off to the journal and they say, yes, this is it. This is what we want. And then the final PDF would be the file with all of the branding and as it would appear in print. So I hope that distinction makes sense. All right. Right. Are there any other questions or any other severe worries about publishing things open access?
Jonathan, I have a question.
Okay.
In a lot of places, you seem to suggest that open access does not have peer reviewing. So are there any open access journals that do have peer review?
I would say that a lot of them actually do have peer review.
Okay.
So the distinction that I want to be sure to make is that that open access is a form of access. It's not the content, again, not the content itself. Preprints and postprints are a version of open access. So they are things that have been produced before peer review has happened. There are things that you can publish just without peer review, right? Blogs are another thing that can be done open access that are not peer reviewed. But then there are a lot of journals that do have peer review as part of their workflow, even though they are publishing open access. So if we think about things like Nature has an open access option, it's very expensive. It's, I think, $10,000 to make an article open access. But that's also because it's Nature and they can do that. But it still undergoes the process of peer review. Then of course there are full journals that it's all open access. It's all peer review. And it's just a matter of finding the right ones. So that's, again, it's a conversation that it's a conversation to have as you're considering publishing something. How important is the peer review process? How important is the open access? And those things are not incompatible. You can have both of those things, and a lot of places do have those things.
That's great. That's helpful. Thank you, Jonathan.
Are there any other questions?
I have a question. I don't know if you can see me.
I can.
Yeah. So thank you, Jonathan. It's really interesting and really great. I learned a lot, including that academia is for profit. I didn't realize that. So the question that I have is about kind of the funding, where to get it to actually publish open access, because my only experience comes from working with Frontiers, and I was lucky enough to be part of the publication where they waived whatever $1,000 that they normally, or something like that, that they charge. How do you go about it?
So that's a really great question, and that's a very important part of open access, right? The money matters. The recommendation from a lot of open access publishers, and I believe it's a recommendation that you would hear when you talk to Ann Baldwin and Sue Rubright. I think that they recommend, and this is my recommendation also, is to write open access fees into grant proposals.
Right.
So that is, I think, the single best way of going about doing it. That way you demonstrate through your proposal that you think this research is valuable beyond a small group of people, or group of people who might have access. And it also is a way of making sure that you can pay for it to be open access. The challenge of that is that writing, let's just say that you're publishing something in Nature and you want to pay those article processing fees of $10,000. So you add that into your grant request. That's a student or two that you could get as research assistants and not publish open access. So it's a matter of priorities and making sure that values align with what you're asking for. And that's a challenge that I think everybody has to deal with. And just something that the open access community is still battling with, is making sure that money and values don't inhibit each other. So I guess it's a human thing also.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming. Amanda, should I turn it over to you?
Yes, thank you all so much for coming. This was great. I've seen Jon give this presentation multiple times before, and every time I learned something new. And I think that we had a great bunch of questions here, a great discussion. So I thank you all so much for giving us your time today. I'm going to stop the recording.